Welcome to the RideShare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
So Hamid Yazdi is the co-founder and head of growth for RideShare Mechanic, a virtual mechanic service that conducts virtual vehicle inspections over live video chat. Hamid's primary focus in the company is to expand its client base by establishing B2B partnerships across various industries in the transportation space, including TNC, peer-to-peer, NEMT, which I think is non-emergency medical transport, taxi, and others. Hamid lives with his wife and 2 boys in Superior, Colorado. He holds a bachelor in mechanical engineering and master's in engineering management from the University of Colorado at Boulder. His favorite hobbies include tennis, snowboarding, and camping. And I know he's a pretty busy guy, so thank you, Hamid, for making the time to come on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Harry. Always a pleasure.
Definitely. And you and I have known each other for quite some time. And I'm not sure how many listeners are out there right now that remember your first appearance on the RideShare Guy podcast, because I believe I pulled it up. I think it was episode 63. But do you remember when you came on the podcast back in episode 63? That was a long time ago, right?
It was a little bit ago. Yep.
Yeah. So I pulled up the episode right here. I'll leave a link in the show notes, but the title is How Hamid Yazdi Recruited Thousands of New Lyft and Uber Drivers. So that was your first of many careers in the gig space. And somehow you made your way into the virtual mechanic business. So why don't we start there? I mean, talk a little bit about, because I believe you have a day job and you've sort of dabbled in and out of the gig economy and done these referrals. So maybe take me back, give me a quick background on yourself and also kind of like how you got into the gig economy. And then we'll dive into RideShare Mechanic and specifically what the company is doing today.
Yes, absolutely. It's actually very relevant to the first conversation you and I had on that podcast episode. What happened was I was looking for a way to make some additional income, and I realized that recruiting drivers was pretty lucrative at one point. And so my business partner and I became ambassadors for the Lyft driver recruitment program. Through that program, we traveled to different cities and launched different markets. And really the goal was to increase the supply of drivers in the different markets that Lyft really needed help in. And by talking to a lot of drivers, I mean, we were doing guerrilla marketing on the street, talking to hundreds of drivers. I mean, we were talking 18-hour, 19-hour days on the street, talking to drivers. And we realized that a lot of the drivers that we spoke with already had initiated their onboarding process with Lyft or Uber, but they didn't complete it. And most of them made it to the step of doing an inspection, which is the final step in the onboarding process. And simply because it requires some effort, you got to go to a mechanic and do all this stuff that takes you out of your home. The other items in the inspection process, or in the driver application process, like your driver's license, your insurance card, details about your car, the background check, all of that can be done from home. When it comes to the inspection, that is the point of highest friction. And we learned that by recruiting lots and lots of drivers. When we were able to do the inspection on site for the vehicle, the driver would often activate or give their first ride. And so that was a conversion for Lyft or Uber, whichever one we were recruiting for. But when they wouldn't do that, a lot of times they would fall off, and that would cause the cost of driver acquisition for Lyft and Uber to increase because the drivers going through the funnel were not actually completing the funnel and becoming active drivers. So we realized that this is a point of a lot of friction. After doing some research, we realized that Uber actually started a pilot many years ago of doing vehicle inspections through like a FaceTime medium, a video chat. And so we started doing that. Uber stopped doing inspections itself completely. I believe because it was perceived to be a conflict of interest of the same company that you're driving for doing inspections. So they offloaded inspections and outsourced them. And even when people were going to green light hubs to doing their inspections, it was always a different mechanic, a different company doing the inspections. They weren't Uber employees. So we took that same concept. We started a mechanic business. So we are a registered, licensed, and certified mechanic. And we started doing these inspections virtually over video chat, kind of like you and I are speaking right now over a Zoom call.
Very cool.
And that really is what created the business RideShare Mechanic. Now, initially, our intention was to attract more drivers, and we would recruit a lot of these drivers. and oftentimes even provide a free inspection. That was, the initial
Yeah.
business model as an extension of what we did originally. But then we realized that, hey, there's a lot of value here. Drivers like the convenience of being able to do
Hmm.
inspections with us. It's very quick. They do it from wherever their car is, at their driveway or wherever it may be. And we're really eliminating the challenge or
Yeah.
the reducing the friction in that process. And so
Yeah.
by making it more convenient, many drivers started using our service. And so that became our primary business model. So
Very cool.
now that's all we do in our company. And we realized that there's a lot more value that
Yeah.
can also be offered to other companies in the transportation space.
So that's funny. I didn't actually realize that Rideshare Mechanic was born from your experience recruiting Uber and Lyft drivers. So I'll definitely recommend that folks, after they're done listening here, they should go back and check out that episode 63, because I think a lot of the principles and the story that you shared in that first interview we did was really interesting. And the principles, I think, the two things that stand out to me, one with affiliate marketing. I mean, I just love this angle. I mean, you guys, and I mean, I myself, especially early on when we were affiliates for Uber and Lyft and recruiting hundreds, if not thousands of drivers for them. I mean, it really, what I love about the affiliate setup for companies is it gives so much creativity to the partners like yourself or the people like me, like, hey, we're getting $300 for these drivers. Why aren't they signing up? Oh, here's the step where they're not signing up. Let me get them a free inspection. Let me start a company that's going to get them a free inspection, right? Like, you can't pay people directly to do that. It's almost like you have to align the incentives. And because I remember doing similar projects with Uber and Lyft, I'm like, hey, where are these guys in your funnel? Why aren't they signing up? Let's send them an email. Let's get them on the phone with me, whatever it takes, right? So I think that one is really cool. And then two, so you guys are now, let's talk about Rideshare Mechanic. You're a registered license and service. Is this a national licensing process, or you guys have to get a license in every state? How does that work?
So it really depends on the state and region we're functional in and where we're working
Hmm.
in. It really depends on the operating rules. Some regions are very specific, and you do
Yeah.
have to have a state license to be able to do the inspections. And we've been able to do that in some regions. We've been partnering with other mechanics in other regions. But
Gotcha.
really, we kind of grew in a way that was kind of, trial and error. We have
Hmm.
to recognize that we're one step removed from the state regulation. We serve as a mechanic. We are a licensed mechanic. We do the inspection. When we complete an inspection and we circle pass or fail, really what we're saying to that driver or the company that we're doing an inspection for is, based on our professional opinion, our inspectors reviewed the vehicle and we believe
Hmm.
that the vehicle passes the minimum requirements on the inspection form. For that TNC to then accept, or the transportation network company, in this case, if it's Uber or Lyft or any of the other
Hmm.
ones out there, for them to accept that inspection, they're the ones who have to make sure that they're abiding by the state regulation and keep those records on file. And so what
Gotcha.
we recognized is, there's definitely a lot of areas that we can operate in. There are
Hmm.
some that we can't, and we're working on. So that is a major initiative of ours today. Today, we offer inspections in over 30 states across the country. There are a few regions that have very specific requirements. Some of them, because the laws are just old and were
Hmm.
written well before anything like video technology, even existed the way it does
Gotcha.
today. And so we're working on that, how to expand and add value to some of the regions. But if someone comes to us from a region in which we don't support, we have to sadly decline if it's for a TNC inspection. Now, we do other types of
Gotcha.
inspections. So for example, in the peer-to-peer space, Turo and Get Around are requiring inspections for their vehicles. It's not a state requirement for them.
Hmm.
The reason they're doing it is not because they're obligated to do it, but it's because there's a benefit for them from a claim standpoint, from reducing risk, from improving the customer
Yeah.
experience of people who rent vehicles on their platform. And so it was really a collaborative effort between us and them, so we could come up with the inspection that made sense to basically impact all those metrics. And so for those companies, we can support them anywhere in the country and even internationally, because we have the process, we have the infrastructure, we have our certified inspectors that can
Yeah.
connect with their hosts anywhere in the country or in the world.
Very cool. Yeah, no, and I want to dig into that B2B side of the business that Rideshare Mechanic is doing and explore some of those use cases. If we stick to the gig economy and, sort of Uber and Lyft drivers specifically, walk me through what's the process right now if I'm someone who finds Rideshare Mechanic, I'm an Uber or Lyft driver, or maybe both. What's the experience like if I want to sign up for Rideshare Mechanic and get a virtual inspection? Where do I start?
Yeah, well, it's very simple. People come to our website and they fill out their basic information. And once we get that information, just the name and email, and we send them a form to fill out information about their vehicle, and then they schedule an appointment with one of our inspectors. So we have a team of certified inspectors that work for us, and then at the time of the appointment, we send some instructions before it of how to prepare the vehicle in advance for a smooth process. They engage in a Zoom call like we are right now, and then so our inspector has their phone, the person at the vehicle, the driver, has their phone. They're going to, turn the camera around and show the vehicle and basically follow the instructions that our inspector provides. So the driver is in a way the surrogate inspector, helping our inspector see everything they need to see. So we'll give instructions like turn on the headlights, activate the windshield wipers, buckle the seat belts, open and close the door, move the seat forward and backwards. There's one part where they have to set the phone down and drive the car forward, drive it backwards, hit the brakes. It's a very creative process where we can inspect every item, use a penny to measure the tire tread and make sure that that is, sufficient.
Oh, interesting.
And then when we're done, they pay for their inspection, and our inspectors, give them access to a dashboard that we have where they can download their inspection form and access it online at any time.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I like the way that you put it. You're sort of the surrogate here in this case. You kind of are the inspector, but there's a third party over virtual Zoom, sort of making sure that everything that you mark off is in fact the case. So, I love the convenience of it. I think probably because I'm especially lazy, maybe because I have two kids, but, just the idea of like going into a mechanic, and obviously it's going to take a while and you got to wait and they got to do the check. You'll probably end up being there an hour, right? For something that really is only going to take 5 or 10. How long do these inspections take typically?
Yeah, the actual inspection is usually about 5 minutes. We've gotten it down to a pretty streamlined process, especially when we tell people how to prepare their vehicle effectively.
Yeah. Make sure you have somewhere to set your phone and things like that.
Yeah, make sure the Bluetooth isn't connected, right? Because then their audio gets hijacked by the Bluetooth audio. Make sure, everything like that, the seatbelts are buckled. And so we can help prepare. So we're minimizing the amount of effort on the driver's part. Now, to your point, it's really cool, actually. The drivers get a little bit more engaged. They have a little more of a sense of ownership in the inspection. Because when you go to a mechanic, what do? You send your car in the back, it's behind a garage, you're sitting in the waiting room, and then your vehicle inspection is done. You didn't see what happened. You don't even know if they did a full inspection, and you get your vehicle. Over here, there's 2 people involved. There's the driver involved, there's the inspector involved, and there's a little bit more of a sense of ownership. And a lot of people, especially many Uber and Lyft drivers, or maybe people who are driving for Zoom or Hop Skip Drive, especially a lot of those personas don't have professional driving experience. Most of them do not. A lot of them don't know what the inspection entails. And so some of them actually appreciate the opportunity to learn more about their vehicle when we guide them through this process.
Yeah, definitely. No, I like that. And I think that anything that kind of adds to that convenience, especially leveraging technology, I imagine during COVID, well, actually, you tell me, during COVID, did you see a lot more of these virtual inspections as everyone? I feel like during COVID, everyone learned how to use Zoom, basically.
Yes. At the beginning of COVID, our revenue declined significantly because nobody was going out. Right?
Gotcha.
Delivery companies were doing well, but delivery companies don't require inspections. And so we were focused on rideshare at the time. And so it was difficult. But once people started going out and drivers started coming back, I think that it was a much more well-accepted idea, because we've been around since 2017, well before the pandemic. But after the pandemic, many, many more people were familiar with the technology. We're starting to accept it. Teledoc became a big thing, right? You have kids, I have kids. It's so convenient to just call the doctor for minor issues. And that's an important differentiation here. Some people wonder, well, how the heck do you do an inspection over video, right? Yeah. Well, there's different types of inspections. The state-based inspection for TNCs is a fairly simple one. It's a 19-point inspection in California, a 25-point inspection in Chicago. It's different for each state, but it's pretty simple. And really all we're certifying is, does the vehicle meet the minimum requirements? Is the tire tread 2/32 of an inch or greater, right? It's a yes or no binary, black and white. Now, if I were to buy a used vehicle, I would not rely on a 19 or 25-point inspection to buy a used vehicle. Gotcha. Just like with Teledoc, if my son wakes up and all I need is a note for school to excuse his absence because he's a little bit sick, I'll gladly do that on Teledoc. Yeah. But if he needs, if he wakes up with pneumonia and we need to get a chest x-ray, I'm taking him to the ER. I'm not going to rely on Teledoc. Yeah. The same thing goes here. It's a simple type of inspection. There's a time and place for it, but there are times where this is not an appropriate process. And so that's why, a lot of people wonder, well, how can we do this? It's the requirements that'll enable us with our unique, process as well. And
Got it. So what's the cost for one of these inspections, and how are drivers using? Are they typically getting Uber only or Lyft only? I saw on your website, I think you guys also have a combo pricing.
Yes.
So what does it look like for drivers? Because that's obviously the bottom line too for them, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we think it's important to consider the total cost of the inspection, including the time, the gas, the potential missed rides or missed opportunity to start driving. So right now, if you go to our website, the price is on our website. Today, the retail price is $40 for one inspection. Price has never been our real differentiator. We don't, we don't market that we're the cheapest. You know, if you go to a Pep Boys, it might be as low as 15 or 20 bucks, but it's the convenience that people pay for. And the other thing is we have to make money to stay in business. When you go to a mechanic, the reality is the mechanic doesn't make money on these inspections. They're trying to bill $150 to $200 an hour to cover their overhead and their cost. And so when you go in for an inspection, they really treat them as a loss leader. They're trying to sell you other things. They're trying to sell you, the air filters and oil change, tires, brakes.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah, because I mean, so I was thinking totally about the convenience, right? It's like save the times, it might be a little bit more, but you save the time, you can go work in that time, or you don't have to deal with it. But I guess the second big thing that honestly might even end up saving you more money is, everyone knows, especially, with I'm happy to throw them under the bus, more of the chains, right? The Firestones and the Jiffy Lubes, right? Those types of outlets are sort of notorious for upselling. And, you need a new rotor belt. And you're like, what the hell is a rotor belt, right? That's $100, $200. And it's almost like, I don't even like going to those places anymore just because it always feels like you're going to get upsold and you're not an expert. So you really don't know. So I think that angle is actually very compelling too for drivers.
Absolutely. And we see that a lot of people who just don't want to go. I mean, during COVID, a lot of people didn't want to go because of potential exposure and they wanted to do it safe, contact free. But a lot of people, they're just worried about the upsell. So we charge a price that allows us to stay in business. We're a cash run business. We didn't raise money. We bootstrapped this. And so that's really the price point where we needed to keep it to maintain our overhead, because we do have an operationally intensive business model, right? We have a physical, a human being on one end doing inspection with a human being on the other end. And so there's operational costs that we have to cover. So that's the cost. We do have a bundle. Really what happened was a lot of people, and some people will say, well, hey, I'm just going to submit my Uber inspection to Lyft or vice versa. And people are welcome to try that. We just got a lot of feedback from customers that, hey, Lyft didn't accept my inspection from Uber, so now I want a Lyft branded form. In fact, this is very interesting, Harry. What we started doing is we realized that each company has different requirements and each state has different requirements. And each region. And so what we decided to do is let's take the largest common denominator and do a more thorough rideshare mechanic inspection that may be overkill for a specific region. But rather than you coming and getting one type of inspection today and another type of inspection in 2 weeks, because many drivers are trying to maximize their income by driving for multiple services. And so what we do is we will inspect everything on the vehicle for the most thorough inspection required, and then give whatever inspection form the driver needs. So if 2 weeks later they come back and need a different form because they want to drive for another service, we've already checked that and we'll backdate the inspection to the time that we viewed the vehicle, maybe a couple of weeks ago, and send them a different inspection form. So that allows us to become kind of their one-stop shop for inspection, regardless of which app they're using. Because a lot of people, they'll drive for Uber and Lyft on the weekends and get the bar crowd. Then during the day, they'll drive for Zoom or Hop Skip Drive or KidKaboo or Kango, any of the child transportation apps. And then maybe they'll drive a taxi as well. And so, it's just different paperwork, and we digitize the whole process, which makes it very simple and do that more thorough inspection for everybody.
Yeah. So it sounds like you guys sort of make it possible to use a single vehicle inspection to drive for Uber and Lyft and other services. But if drivers kind of try to do this on their own, it's a little bit more, your results may vary, huh?
Exactly. It's, again, trying to bring more convenience for the driver. And of course, you mentioned we'll talk about the company B2B side. We'll talk about the convenience and digitization there as well. But when it comes to the driver, I mean, today, a lot of people don't even own a printer at home. Right. You got to print the form, take it to the mechanic, have them sign it, take a picture of that form and upload it. It's a lot of hassle for them. We digitize it, and then if they want another inspection, they got to go back, get another inspection, get stuck in traffic, spend money on gas, all that stuff that we talked about. And so we basically eliminate all that.
So who are you competing with? What alternatives do Uber and Lyft drivers have today when it comes to vehicle inspections? We talked about the Jiffy Lube and the Firestones. I guess that's one. I guess I'm sort of thinking about like what alternatives they have, and then also like how that ties in, for drivers, like what are the common issues that they have when they come to Rideshare Mechanic, or, the questions that they might have most frequently when they are working with you?
So to answer the first question, that is exactly who we're competing against,
Mhm.
the chains out there.
Got it.
And in terms of what the
Do
drivers
Uber and Lyft
ask,
still offer inspections or?
they do have some green light hubs or partnerships.
Mhm.
And so there may be ways to still get inspections either at a reduced fee that's pre-negotiated,
Yeah. I mean,
or
because I guess what I've seen is like during COVID, they've closed down a lot of these support
they
centers.
closed a
Like I think
lot of them
in
now.
Uber, I don't think
Yeah.
Uber has a single support center in the entire city of San Francisco, which is kind of crazy, because that's where a lot
They
of
used
rides
to have a
happen.
lot,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so it was sad to see the green light hubs kind of disappear,
Hmm.
or I should say disappear. They reduced them
Yeah.
significantly. There used to be, at least
So there's
5 or
sort of,
6 in the LA region, and
yeah.
now there might be
So
only
there's
1
sort of
or 2.
limited options now for drivers. And even then, some do offer, some don't. And I feel like Uber started charging for a while, and it's because it used to be free. It was like it used to be the good old days. So I think you guys came along at a good time. There's now less choice. And, I think Uber is even charging in a lot of places now for these
Yep.
inspections.
And a lot of inspections are expensive. A lot of people
Hmm.
go to a dealership and they'll spend $50 on inspections. So we're
Yeah.
actually cheaper from a cost standpoint. But to go back to your question of the questions that drivers have, I mean,
Yeah.
most drivers who ask us questions just wonder, how legitimate is this? How
Hmm.
thorough is it? In fact, my favorite comment I see in our Google reviews is when someone says this inspection was more thorough than the last inspection I did at
Oh, really?
at a mechanic. And there's a lot of reasons for that. First of all,
Yeah.
we have inherently a more auditable and more fraud-proof process. So
Yeah.
let me dig into this a little bit. And this becomes very important for the TNCs, the regulators like the taxi companies, the non-emergency medical
Hmm.
transportation companies. They really care about this because there's 2 types of fraud when it comes to vehicle inspections. The first
Yeah.
type is when the mechanic is not thoroughly inspecting the vehicle. The
Yeah.
second type is when the driver is modifying the inspection form before they submit it to the company that they're submitting it to. We solve both
Gotcha.
of those. So let me dig into this a little bit more detail. The first one, the mechanic. Personal experience here. Let me tell you a story. I took my
Hmm.
vehicle to one of the big chains that's close to my house,
Yeah.
and I said, I need this vehicle inspected for Lyft. I printed out the form, took it to them. The gentleman saw my car from about 40 feet away and
Hmm.
signed the form without
Yeah.
even touching the vehicle, without even coming close to it.
Yeah.
It was a newer car, but he didn't even validate the odometer. He signed it.
Gotcha.
He said, yeah, go ahead, fill this out. You're good to go. Again, they don't make money on these inspections. They don't
Right.
like doing inspections.
Gotcha.
But most cases, you don't even have that experience. You take the car, goes to the back of the garage. You have no idea what's going on. You come back with a form, right? And of
Hmm.
course, a list of a bunch of things to maybe upsell you. The reason we eliminate that is because, first of all, there's always 2 people involved in our process. There's our inspector.
Yeah.
There's them as the driver. So already inherently, you have 2 people every single time. So both of those people committing fraud is less likely than just one
Hmm.
person behind a closed door garage. The second is we have an auditable process. We can record every single inspection that we do. And
Yeah.
we have an whole audit process. We have like secret shopper programs where we will literally hire someone to come do inspections with our certified inspectors just to keep them honest.
Hmm.
Because if we can't do these safely, then we have no reason to be in business.
For
We don't
sure.
have the right. So safety is one of our biggest things, and making sure we do it legitimately. So that's the first way that we combat that type of fraud. The second way, in terms of modifying the inspection form, when you go to a mechanic and you get an inspection form, you have that form and you got to upload it to Uber. There's an opportunity there to commit fraud, and this happens a
Tweak
lot.
it. Yeah.
You can white out, you can, Photoshop, whatever. We are the primary source of the inspection, and we're providing
Hmm.
that inspection not only directly to the driver, but directly to the company that we're partnered with. And
Gotcha.
so the company has access to our dashboard, the same
If you have a
dashboard
partnership with that
information.
company.
If we have a
Yeah.
partnership, exactly. And that's where the partnership becomes very valuable,
Cool.
and why a lot of companies want to work with us. So the driver knows that, hey, this company is seeing the exact same form. If there's
Yeah.
any discrepancy, they're going to know that, I'm doing some funny business here. And so we avoid both of those types of fraud with our process.
Very cool. Well, I think we've teased it long enough, but I'm excited to talk about the B2B partnerships. And I guess first, sort of set the scene about how many, vehicle inspections have you guys done with customers? I know I see on Google here, I was really impressed. You guys have close to 3,000 reviews and a 4.9 star rating, which I feel like if you've got 4.9 star in like Google or Yelp or something like that, that's like kind of unheard of because, you always get these people like 1 star this, 1 star that. The mechanic was, 25 seconds late to the meeting, 1 star, right? Like it's tough out there, but it seems like you guys are doing well on the B2C side for sure. And talk about some of the volume you're doing there, and how many partners I guess you have on the B2B side, and we'll get into that.
Yeah, so we have completed over 140,000 inspections in the last 5 years that we've been in business.
Oh, wow.
Today, we do about 2,500 inspections a month. So, it's a pretty busy operation. And of course, we have aspirations to continue growing from there. I mean, really what we've built is a scalable operation that has really good customer service and
Hmm.
scalability. The fact that we are a mechanic and inspect vehicles is kind of arbitrary.
Hmm.
We've built a process that uses technology and can do a thorough inspection in a way that people really like, and it's very convenient for them. So the reason we have such good reviews is because, I mean, we hire for good customer service skills. We
Yeah.
did, when we introduced our dashboard, we did have some technology hurdles to go
Hmm.
through of people accessing their form and making their payment. So any of the reviews that might be, not so positive is really related to that portion of it,
Hmm.
which we're working on solving, because we're always pushing what we can do. Now we have our proprietary
Yeah.
technology that we've built custom, which allows us to really make the process a lot more
Hmm.
streamlined. But just like any business, we're growing, we're learning, and we're improving things. But we love the reviews that we get and people, talking about how great
Yeah.
of an experience they had.
Very
Uh,
cool. Well, yeah. So, I mean, talking about the B2B partners, I mean, one thing you said really struck me is, from your own experience recruiting drivers, that the biggest drop off in the funnel was at this vehicle inspection point. And I started thinking about it. You're right. Right. I mean, I remember I joke in my book, I think that like I signed up to drive for Lyft and Uber from my couch. I signed up, I uploaded my insurance, I did the background check, but I did have to do an in-person vehicle inspection. And that's really like the only, tough part of the
mhm.
signing up process. And so I imagine that, for over the past few years, companies like Uber and Lyft and others have had this huge driver supply shortage. And it seems pretty obvious, like, hey, who's in our funnel? How can we get them to convert at a much higher percentage? So I have to imagine that your B2B partners and rideshare companies really love this service.
You hit the hammer on the nail. I mean, that is exactly the problem right now. There's a driver shortage.
Hmm.
So anything that makes it difficult to onboard is going to further exacerbate that situation.
Yeah.
It's important for TNC for sure. Like you said, I mean, you lose momentum. I mean, imagine it's Thursday night and you thinking, oh, you know what? I want to make some extra money. I got a birthday coming up for my
Yeah.
kid. Let's go out tomorrow. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, done, 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 boom, boom. Oh, shoot. Now I got to do an inspection.
Yeah.
And if you miss that weekend, you lose the momentum. Who's going to come
Hmm.
back on a Monday and do it? A lot of people won't, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really the value that we bring to the TNCs. In the regulatory space, in taxis, it's even worse. We were
Mm.
just at the International Association of Transportation Regulators conference just last week, and this is where a lot of the regulators were. And vehicle utilization is a huge topic.
Hmm.
You have people who are paying a weekly lease to have their taxi, to take it off the road for hours to get an inspection. Sometimes it's much more of a hassle than how people get inspections for Uber and Lyft. We want to improve the utilization of that vehicle. We don't want to take that vehicle off the road. We
Yeah.
want to make it very simple. And so being able to make it frictionless, make it easier, more convenient, it definitely increases utilization. It helps the companies have their compliance, and it helps the credentialing of the vehicles for the drivers and the companies.
Got it. So what kind of verticals, I guess, either rideshare or NEMT, do you want to kind of talk about some of your main verticals that you guys are in? And then maybe we can dig into a couple of the companies that you're actually
Absolutely.
partnered with?
So we started out with TNC, the rideshare industry, and
Hmm.
that's why our name is Rideshare Mechanic. We
Yeah.
probably are long overdue for a rebranding because
Well, you're
that's
talking
where
to
we
someone who
started.
knows that firsthand, but it's a good
Yep.
name, so you might as well run with it.
Exactly. We've been running with it for now, but
Yeah.
the non-emergency medical transportation space, a lot of times the lines are being blurred between TNC and
Yeah.
NEMT and even taxi. And the reason is because of this driver shortage and either brokers needing more drivers to give
Hmm.
rides. So in non-emergency medical transportation, you have a payer like Medicaid or Medicare or United Healthcare. They're paying for rides, and people need to get to doctor's appointments. So
Yeah.
those companies, they have brokers that will then work with transportation providers or basically fleets to basically fulfill these rides. Well, a lot of
Yeah.
times they don't have enough supply of drivers, so they'll work with other TNCs, like one of our partners, Userve, or they might work with even Uber or Lyft or other
Yeah.
ones out there.
I know. Yeah, no, NEMT, I mean, a non-emergency medical transport, I think is a really big and growing vertical because sort of like, someone who's going to dialysis or, has an appointment, a medical appointment, like they don't need an ambulance or some fancy transport. They basically just
Exactly.
need an Uber, maybe a little extra assistance. I know, I think companies like Wings are getting into the NEMT space. I know this is a lot of opportunity there. So it sounds like you guys have a good foothold there too. Is there anything additional inspection wise there, or is it kind of
Yes.
similar? What are you guys
Yes,
doing in the
absolutely.
NEMT
No,
space?
there's additional checking for certain things like a seatbelt cutter, a fire extinguisher,
Oh, cool.
proper objects in the vehicle. If it's a wheelchair accessible vehicle, I mean, most of the rides are ambulatory or curb to curb for people who are able to walk and use a regular vehicle. But if it's a wheelchair accessible vehicle, there are certain things, the hooks and how the wheelchair would connect, or a stretcher. And so we do provide that for the NEMT or non-emergency medical transportation industry. But the same problem we're seeing with the taxi industry, or the same solution to find more drivers, they're partnering with TNCs. I mean, Uber now has a partnership through Curb in New York and Flywheel in San Francisco, where you can basically request a vehicle with the same experience as requesting an Uber ride for a taxi company, but instead, or on the
taxi
Uber
shows
app,
up, yeah,
and a taxi shows up. Exactly. And so these are showing ways that it's unprecedented, at least in this country, not internationally, but it's unprecedented, the collaboration that Uber and the taxi companies have today because of this driver shortage. And as our company does, with the vehicle inspections, we reduce the friction in doing the inspections and keeping those cars compliant. And so we're increasing against the utilization and improving the driver shortage issue and the supply issue.
So with the partners who are, on board with Rideshare Mechanic, what's the number one reason they're coming to you? Is it because they feel that this helps with the driver shortage and getting more folks onboarded and, kind of accelerated through their funnel? Is that the main reason?
There are a lot of reasons from an operations.
Well, you got to pick one.
I would say, let's pick two: improving internal operations and eliminating fraud, inspection fraud. We're digitizing a process that was very manual, that involved a lot of paperwork, and keeping track of all the credentials is a nightmare for a lot of these companies. The second thing of operations, improving operations. I mean, they get real-time updates of our inspection process through this dashboard that they have access to.
That's cool.
And so again, digitizing, going through that digital transformation.
That's a good point, because like when I submit an inspection to Uber, right, a human has to literally go in and check that, right? Like I imagine in sort of a seamless situation, if you guys were partnered with Uber, I'm in that funnel, and then I come to that last step. It's like, do you want to do a virtual inspection? There's an agent waiting for you right now. You do the inspection, it's uploaded to Uber. You could literally be driving in seconds or sorry, minutes, right? Like that could be, I guess that seamless operations is really cool. And I feel like that's like a no-brainer.
I mean, eliminating the fraud portion is huge for these guys as well, because they know there is fraud going on. They just don't have a way of tackling it. And so this way we have a full audit trail, we have a digital process. And some of the NEMT companies I've spoken with, they're interested in the downstream. And in litigation, if there's a vehicle that has a claim and it gets to a court, they could say, hey, here's the record, here are all the digital records that we did this inspection. And in fact, we can produce the recorded video if that's what the partner was interested in, us recording this Zoom call to make sure that everything was checked properly at that time.
So Hamed, I have a confession to make. Do you know what it is?
Go for it. I don't.
I have forged a vehicle inspection form before.
Wow.
Many times. So one of the things that, one of the reasons, I mean, my whole sort of reason for starting the blog and the podcast is because I want to go out and be an actual driver and think like an actual driver, right? Like if you're working, you've got this company, it's like, oh yeah, it's annoying. You got to do this inspection, but it's like, I don't want to go out and do the inspection. I'm a lazy driver. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to do this. And I'm like, hey, wait, I've got my inspection from last time. Why don't I just try using the exact same signature? And like, honestly, that worked a lot. And so, I mean, this is like something, I guess I wouldn't say I can't like recommend it, right? But it's like the drivers go out there and it's honestly like you can easily get away with it. And I imagine for, if you're Uber or Lyft, like there's some serious liability, if a car does get into an accident and it's like one of the seatbelts was missing, for example, and they track it back, there's a very easy paper trail to see like, wow, this seatbelt, this inspection was forged. And then that's kind of, on the driver, but also Uber. I mean, the driver, obviously, these guys aren't making a ton of money. So it's more, in a lawsuit that they're going after Uber. So I feel like that liability and fraud, I haven't really thought about it in that manner. But I mean, the fraud is definitely happening, for sort of the reasons I laid out, right? It's a hassle for drivers.
Absolutely. And so, a lot of the partners that we talk to, that's when they realize that, because a lot of them are also kind of hesitant. Well, can you really do this in a virtual manner? We'll do a demo. We'll show them how thorough we are. We'll show them the unique ways that we check things that they would otherwise think you can't really check. But the big thing is, okay, our process is bulletproof in terms of not being able to commit fraud. Now, let's be honest, there is some fraud that you can't do anything about. I mean, there's stories of people swapping out their tires before doing the inspection, and then after the inspection, changing out the tires again. Well, there's nothing you can really do unless you like mark the tires physically. No one's going to do that. So, I mean, the inspection, it's really a deterrent from getting really unsafe cars.
For sure. Like, I think in general, like, I like the fraud approach where like, it's not easy, right? Like someone's switching out the tires and switching back. It's like, wow, that's a lot of effort, right? Like me, I literally just copied the old form that I used last time. Like, you got to make it a little tougher, right?
We wouldn't let that fly, for sure.
So I would get busted with you guys, and I have no shame.
But the other thing that companies like to work with us is we're flexible. We can work with their process. We can integrate into their process. We have requests of integrating into their CRM, or customer relationship management software, where once we pass an inspection, it automatically updates on their end and triggers either approvals or keeping the car active, or the vehicle if you're a host on a rental platform. But also, like, for example, with Outdoorsy, one of our partners, we're inspecting RVs. It's a 50-point vehicle inspection. We work together collaboratively with our ASC certified master technician and their team and one of our RV specialists. And we came up with this inspection to improve the inspection process for them. So it's a very different process. It's not just so black and white, but when we have this opportunity to work collaboratively with our partners, they really appreciate that. And so we really become a partner to them and help them scale, and while maintaining, safety.
Yeah, well, I guess I didn't realize you guys were also partnered with Outdoorsy. We've got an article on our site right here. How does Outdoorsy work? Outdoorsy Review 2022. I think the whole RV craze over the past few years. So that's interesting. So let's talk about, maybe, the last thing we can touch on in this B2B side is, what are some of those other areas, or like, what's the value proposition to Outdoorsy or, other companies outside of like the obvious, transportation, driver use case?
Right.
You mentioned Turo too, something like that.
So in the peer-to-peer space, so there's two different buckets of companies. One bucket, the company has to do an inspection. They're required. They're obligated legally to do it, right? For those companies, there is friction in their process. We reduce that friction. We make that process better, or we make it suck less, right? I mean, you still got to go through that.
Yeah.
The driver may not want to do that. We make it easier.
Right.
For the companies that don't have that requirement, especially the early stage companies, they're not thinking too much about driver safety and reducing claims or risk mitigation, right? Their trust and safety department is a little bit more loose, because
typically it's like, you have a million things. So it's like you wait until something happens, then you're kind of like, oh crap, I need to get these practices in place. Right?
Or you're just trying to grow to get that next round of funding, right? I mean, a lot of these companies now, Turo is a great example. GetAround is a great example of a more mature company. 10 years ago, these companies only wanted to grow and get as many users as they could, so their KPIs could look good, so their investors could be happy, so they could get the next round of funding and continue building out their valuation. But then they get to a point where they realize, okay, our reputation is important. Our risk mitigation strategies are important. We got to reduce our claims. It's very expensive. Now let's add a little bit of friction to our hosts. Our hosts aren't going to like this because they didn't have to do this before, and we're not legally obligated to do this. But a company like Rideshare Mechanic allows us to do this in a more convenient manner that reduces the friction and doesn't bother them as much. Other companies are in different stages where they're not there yet.
And so what would be one example? So what are you guys doing for like a Turo or GetAround, for example, in like that car sharing example?
I mean, we're doing an inspection that we came up with together based on, we used the TNC inspection as a baseline, and then we added certain things based on what they see a lot for claims.
Got it.
Okay. And basically we work together and we build that process, and then we scale that process internally through our operations.
Very cool. So for example, if a company was saying, oh, we're having issues with cars that have brake checks, it's like we do a more thorough brake check aspect of that inspection.
Brake fluid, viewing the battery, for example.
And I think that gives, this is one thing with these sharing economy companies, right? It's like the concept and the idea sounds great, but once you start doing millions of transactions, like, these 1 in a million type situations are going to happen, right? And so it's sort of like, do you have the protections in place where it's like, hey, someone renting a car on Turo, right? Like, especially in that car sharing at enterprise, they get it checked, periodically, but now you're kind of putting that onus on the host, the owner, right? So it's like, hey, we need to sort of make sure they're doing some inspection or go a little bit above and beyond, right?
Exactly. And it protects the host in a claim situation as well,
For sure.
because
Yeah, no,
we
that's a
have
good
that
point.
documentation. And, for those hosts as well, I mean, um, we are, we're checking all these things that they want us to check with that, based on our partnership. We can also flag certain things based on the request. So Turo may say, hey, if there's, an issue with one of the, let's say that, cleanliness is a concern, just flag it. Don't
Yeah.
delist the car. Let us know that this is a red flag. You should look into it. So we're very clear with our partners who don't have a clear, legal requirement from the state of,
Gotcha.
okay, these 20 things, if they fail, the car gets delisted, they have to get it fixed. But these 5 things, we see them as a problem, just flag it so we know, and we can reach out to the host to do that. And our failure rate, one thing I will mention is a lot of our partners really love, they've actually told us, we love it when we see a failed inspection come through because we know you guys are doing your job.
Yeah.
And our failure rate is about 4%, which is pretty standard for mechanics that do the inspection.
Gotcha.
I mean, keep in mind, people who come to do an inspection, they know they're expecting to have their car inspected. It's kind of like when you go to the dentist, you brush your teeth before you go to the dentist. If you know that the light bulbs are out, your headlights are out, you're probably going to not do your inspection to get that, taken care of. But still, 4% of vehicles fail the inspection, even when they show up for their appointment. So it would be higher if they didn't inspect it, right? But that's part of our statistics.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing all that information about the B2B use case and also, going direct to Uber and Lyft drivers. I've got a couple bonus questions here for you if you have time. But before we get into the bonus round, so if folks want to learn more about Rideshare Mechanic, where can they go, either to talk to you if they're a platform or a partner interested in signing up on that sort of B2B side, or, if they're a driver and they need a vehicle inspection, where should they go?
Sure. Well, the first thing they can do is probably click on the link you're going to add to this podcast, right?
Yeah.
To come to our website. They can also, if for a B2B company, a TNC, an NEMT, a peer-to-peer or taxi company that wants more information, they can email us at partners@ridesharemechanic.com. And that's kind of our B2B funnel. And that's just a very different conversation of understanding their process and how we fit in and support them.
Yeah. Well, no, I think it sounds great. And I think, I love highlighting companies, such as yourself that are sort of working, with drivers, but also on the partnership side and working with companies directly to improve a lot of the aspects of this experience. Because I think it kind of, a rising tide lifts all boats. And of course, me having known you personally, I guess for, many years now, and your origins as a Lyft driver and recruiting, and, I sort of know that you're definitely going to do right by drivers. So I appreciate all that. So my 2 bonus questions. One, I'm going to let you ask me a question. This is a new segment that I do. Whenever I remember, I let my guests ask me one question. So think about that for a second. Okay. But also when you were talking, I was wondering, can you wrap your car in an advertisement and then drive for Uber and Lyft? How did the inspections work with that process? Because I feel like we've gotten, obviously there's a bunch of car wrapping companies out there. So I know it's possible, but we get a lot of questions from drivers about that in regards to the inspection.
Yeah, so the wrap is typically not something that shows up on the vehicle inspection form, but it varies based on the region. That's really the best answer I can give. And because I'm not in operations, I don't know exactly which regions. My director of operations probably know exactly. But there are some regions where it could be an issue and others where it's not an issue.
Got it. Okay. So, I mean, I guess if you're a driver in an area and you see a bunch of other cars wrapped and doing Uber and Lyft, it's probably okay. And they're able to get that inspection. And if you don't, it might be a little more challenging. I know there were some weird rules, like for a while, you couldn't use digital signage at airports, and then you would have to turn it off whenever you went into an airport. So it's interesting. I think for me, as you might imagine, I'm the guy who defrauded, with an inspection form. I'm just like, let's go for it. And, for drivers, I want them to make as much money as possible. So I like highlighting these opportunities and, then finding a way to get the inspection done. So I know drivers have had sometimes run into issues, going to like an Uber inspection lot. And it's like, hey, you got a wrap on your car. You can't do this, right? But obviously other mechanics are much more lenient.
Right.
So cool. Well, that's the first bonus question. And then the last one that I'll leave you with, I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask me a question, and, we'll leave links to everything we mentioned in the show notes too, but appreciate you coming on, and Hamed, the floor is yours.
Perfect, perfect. Well, I will, first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity. I hope this has been beneficial and educational for all the listeners out there. Always a pleasure to connect with you. Obviously, you and I have known each other for a while.
Yeah.
One last comment I will make before I ask you the question is,
Sure.
if anyone is curious, any companies out there, we know what we're doing is a little bit different. We kind of pioneered the space and really grew it to what it is. Just entertain a conversation, keep an open mind. New technology sometimes creates a little bit of hesitation, but when people really audit our process, even regulators, right? I mean, we're working with the San Diego Metropolitan Transit System. They audited our process, they viewed it, we did a demo, and we started talking about some of these basic things of how to prevent fraud and digitize their process, started making a lot of sense to them. So my biggest comment would be just, focus on the data, let's, suspend judgment. And be open-minded, and let's have a conversation, see where it goes. But my question to you, Harry, is, and thanks for sharing your experience about, basically, reusing rinse and repeat an inspection from the past. But one thing I want to ask you is, you've used our service yourself, right?
I have.
Why don't you explain how your experience was and how that differed from, a traditional one, and any comments on?
Well, I think, as you can probably have guessed from my story, I am not a big fan of, going into the mechanic. And, I ended up a few years ago, I got a Tesla, actually. And I think that was the impetus for me doing the virtual inspection, because, the great thing about EVs is you never need to take them in for service. There's no oil change, especially if you get a newer car, right? There's no brake jobs for a while. And I actually, one issue I ran into is, like, because I never took it in, I never got my tires rotated. So I only, for the first time on my Tesla Model Y, after 20,000 miles, I got my tires rotated. And even that, I had a Tesla guy, he comes to your house and does it for $50. So I thought that was a pretty good deal, but now I got to be a little more diligent. But that was really the reason why I wanted to try Rideshare Mechanic, from, like, with my driver hat on, and, sort of thinking about, obviously every driver is a bit different, but, I think I like the process for sure because of that, like, convenience at home. I've always tried, mechanics. Your Mechanic was one of our first partners. I brought them to the house, and, like, I'll try anything. We just tried a company called Currently that charges your EV at your house. So I really like that kind of concept of coming to you, because you can then, maybe use that time more effectively. Like you mentioned, as a driver, like, hey, if you can make money during that time, that's a better opportunity for you. So that was really, like, my personal impetus for using it. And of course, Rideshare Mechanic is an affiliate for RideShare Guy. So I got to test and try all the products myself, or, have someone on my team. So that was sort of obviously the big second reason. And I was definitely a fan of the service. I thought it was pretty seamless. I think that, like, the only thing, the actual inspection, like you said, is pretty quick, but there's, like, you get a list of things beforehand, like, to prep. And, like, I'm a total, like, I don't know what the word is, but, like, I didn't read most of that. You know what I mean? Like, the inspection came and I'm like, oh wait, crap, what do I need? I need a penny. I'm like, oh gosh, where do I have a penny? Right. And, who uses change anymore? And so it was sort of like, I had to do a quick scramble. Right. So, I think anything that kind of even, sort of almost like accommodates for the person like me, who's probably not going to, read the instructions to make it go streamlined, and it's like kind of dummy proof it for someone like me, basically, would be my one feedback. But I think overall, definitely a fan of the process and submit it. I do think it would be, maybe a bit beyond your control, but if it was integrated into Uber and Lyft specifically too, that would be amazing. As soon as the inspection's done, I can go drive, like, within seconds, right? And not have to wait to submit it. That might be a little bit beyond your control, but those would be kind of my experience and two pieces of feedback.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful.
Sure. So I appreciate you coming on, Hamed, and I guess we'll have to have you on again for your next business, or your next big announcement in regards to Rideshare Mechanic in the future. So appreciate you coming on, and take care.
Thanks for having me, Harry.